Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring, Chris Brown, they are both here with me here on a Tuesday morning. Pretty much, right, the practice when a big trade is made in the NBA is you immediately go and look at that team schedule to see when the first time that they play a team that, like, they might have to play in the playoffs just to see how it works. We didn't have to wait very long for the Nets to play a team that, in theory, they might have to go through to get to an Eastern Conference Finals, to an NBA Finals. And not only did we get it quickly, we got a really, really good one quickly. Nets 125, Bucks 123. James Harden and Kevin Durant combined for 64 points. Giannis, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, and Drew Holiday combined for like 80. It was a good game, and it was also a game in which the stars on each team performed. Joe Harris had 20 points. It was a really, really good NBA regular season game, and right, I was being skeptical with Josh for the last 3 days about trying to bank on this game being worth talking about, and I will admittedly swallow my words, and I'm excited to talk about it because it was a really good game.
Yeah, it was interesting in that it had sort of all those elements, right? It had the stars, all of them showing up, and it had that battle. It also had, in the end, it wasn't even just all about the stars either, because you have it coming down to role players in a large degree, right? You have the Nets, with the Nets, Joe Harris and Jeff Green contributing 34 points combined, which that was interesting to see, and sort of, I guess, an obvious statement here. It's going to be next to impossible to beat the Nets when Joe Harris and Jeff Green are combining for 34 points. So there's that element of it. One other observation I'll share off the top here is, the Bucks couldn't exploit Brooklyn's clear weaknesses. Like, the blueprint for the Bucks should have been pretty clear coming into this game, right? Kill them inside. But the Nets ended up out rebounding the Bucks in this game 49-41. So I guess another observation is just that's not a trend that, right, it's one game, but that's not a trend that can carry over into the postseason. If it does, the Nets are going to win that battle. If the Nets are out rebounding the Bucks by a decent margin, they're not going to lose. So that's a couple observations I had off the top. But yeah, this was a really, really fun game to watch. For me, I certainly picked a good one. We certainly had a good one for me to tune into. I'm not watching, 18 games a week or anything, a couple games a week. And this one certainly lived up to my expectations. It was an impressive one and a good amount of takeaways, things to discuss. So yeah, those are just a couple of my off the top thoughts.
Yeah, the Nets were better than I thought defensively. Now, they still gave up a decent amount of points, but that's also
Mm-hmm.
just the reality of playing a good team in today's NBA. The couple things that really stuck out to me, because I just have a hard time drawing too many conclusions about one regular season matchup, but
Mm-hmm.
that second to last possession the Nets had, where they got an open James Harden three, a James Harden offensive rebound, and an open Kevin Durant three that he hit that ultimately was the game winner. That's what this should look like. That was really good basketball. And by and large, they played good basketball and moved the ball. And Josh, you texted me this, and I was already thinking the exact same thing. I want this version of the Nets more than the one with Kyrie. It goes back to the same thing, the same conversation when Kyrie was in Boston. Does he actually make your team better?
Mm-hmm.
If you told me that you were giving up that to get James Harden to pair him with Kevin Durant, it makes so much more sense because Durant can be a spot up shooter and an isolation guy, and you can put the ball in Harden's hands. And again, as we talked about with the trade, you're getting the best out of both of them, maximizing both of them.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't surprised that the Nets looked this good with these two. My question is, can they look this good when Kyrie is on the floor too? Because then you take away James Harden's ability to break down a defense because the ball's in Kyrie's hands. And Kevin Durant maybe doesn't get that final shot. That was a really good look. They got two excellent looks and they missed one. James Harden made a good hustle play to get the rebound, and then Durant hit the second one. They looked really good. I can't put too much stock into this until we see it with Kyrie,
Mm-hmm.
because all of the concerns, aside from can they make this work from a relational standpoint? This is much similar to the Clippers. It's not a question of the talent or the roster. Well, the Clippers roster is somewhat flawed, but it's the can Paul George and Kawhi Leonard make this happen in the playoffs?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question with this version of the Nets. There are different questions that come when you throw Kyrie in because I'm not sure that they look this good. That was the biggest thing for me is I feel pretty good about the Nets being right up there at the top of the East. If this is the team we're getting, I'm just not convinced this is the team we're getting when they're at full strength.
I will be watching very, very closely because Kyrie was, I believe, eligible for this game. They just, for the sake of conditioning and him still ramping his conditioning back up and getting back into game shape, that he didn't play in this one. At least that's the vibe I was getting from some of the reports I saw. So I'll be watching very closely. I don't think it's a coincidence that Jeff Green, Joe Harris, and DeAndre Jordan combined to go 5 of 6, 7 of 12, and 6 of 6 from the floor, because the ball movement was just really solid. It really, I mean, it was. It's you put James Harden in a pick and roll, and the fact that Kevin Durant is one of the other weapons you have to worry about when James Harden's in the pick and roll, that opens things up pretty quickly for everybody else. Now, I still have my reservations about you trying to win a championship when James Harden in the pick and roll is your number one source of offense. That hasn't changed. But James Harden, the Rockets have been home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs for the better part of the last decade for a reason. And that's because James Harden is just spectacular in the regular season, and putting him in a pick and roll for 82 games works well enough to get you a really good seed, if not the one seed in some cases, in the playoffs. So I don't have any. My thoughts haven't changed about how I feel about this team in the playoffs necessarily, or just a James Harden led team in the playoffs, or him being one of the most important players on the floor for your team in the playoffs. But it's not a coincidence that Jeff Green had one of his games where he looks like a really, really good NBA player, right? He's either one of the best players on the floor or one of the worst players on the floor. There's no in between with Jeff Green. But it's easy to knock down shots when the ball was moving the way that it was, and when James Harden and Kevin Durant are at the center of the ball movement. They had 18 assists combined. There were 26 total from the Nets, and 18 of them came from Kevin Durant and James Harden. Now, yes, those are flawed. Those are skewed numbers to a certain extent just because of how much they have the ball in their hands. It's the same thing with Westbrook. I don't consider Westbrook a good passer necessarily. He just has the ball in his hands 42 of the 48 minutes of the game, so he's going to have 12 assists. But it just makes, and this is what I said to you, Josh, it just makes sense that this looks better, right? Yeah. It's not
the pieces fit.
Right. It's not a right. They were 46 of 84 from the field. They knocked down 15 3-pointers on 31 attempts. They were 18 of 21 from the free throw line. I was left with a lot to be desired by the Bucks defense as well, but it's not a coincidence that this looks good. Right, you have arguably the two best scorers in the NBA right now, with DeAndre Jordan, who will go and get you some rebounds, and then Jeff Green, who on a good night will knock down shots, and Joe Harris is one of the best knockdown 3-point shooters in the NBA right now. It makes sense, and like you said, Josh, it's a lot easier to maximize James Harden and Kevin Durant than it is to maximize James Harden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, especially when we talk about Harden and Kyrie, because they do the same thing. They're both incredibly gifted at the same thing. Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway here, is that, man, it makes sense. It wasn't a issue of they just played well and everyone was knocking down shots. Everyone played well and they were knocking down shots because what was happening on the floor just makes sense. And yeah, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have major, like, completely different feelings about Brooklyn in the playoffs. But what I saw last night was impressive, and what I saw last night was logical.
And there's a chance that it even gets, I mean, from a ball movement perspective, and at least in terms of avoiding mistakes, it could get even smoother. I mean, the Nets had 17 turnovers to the Bucks 5, and that's something that, like, I can excuse away part of that as Harden's still adjusting to that system. Like, it could be even Like that ball movement could be even better they could be even better in avoiding mistakes moving forward in that regard. Of course, yeah, because there's so many things, right? Like I looking at the box score and from what I saw, where I can try to look and paint it one way or another, right? The Bucks can comfortably know that Brooklyn's not going to outshoot them 48% to 29% from beyond the arc. And so there are certain things that just aren't going to go that way. And right, Kyrie's going to be in there. Things are going to be different. But I think, yeah, you look at those bigger trends, those actual gameplay changes, the ball movement, those kind of things that hypothetically the big question is with Kyrie could continue to happen. We can continue to see those not adjustments, that sort of strategy, that sort of all coming together in that way. Those are the kind of things that we could see carry over and be a bigger factor. Just like those are the things to watch, those bigger trends, rather than just, as I'm starting to look at the box score and thinking, wow, they shot 48% from beyond the arc. Like that's great. And obviously those are the things that are going to be better the better the ball movement is. But I think, yeah, looking at those bigger trends are much more sort of impactful, much more bigger things that we should watch in the matchups between these two teams the rest of the regular season to see how that compares. And if some of these other smaller things become bigger trends, then that's something to sort of monitor more. The rebounding, the 3-point shooting. If they become on their own bigger trends against each other, then okay. But at this point, I think, yeah, you focus in on those sort of gameplay strategy things, like you said, Josh.
And here's the other thing. We came in here talking about how well the Nets played and how impressive they were. And the Bucks still almost won this game.
And Chris Middleton was 0 of 5 from the 3-point line. just to throw it out there.
And the other thing I was really curious about that we talked about with the Harden trade that sort of popped into my mind was I'll take the Bucks defensively against this team. So I was curious to see if, and again, not that you're going to stop Kevin Durant and James Harden, but I feel pretty good about what the Bucks can put against them defensively.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious to see how that played out when these two teams actually faced each other, which is why I was so excited for this particular matchup. And then for portions of the fourth quarter before it got to crunch time, we had Pat Connaughton guarding Kevin Durant. And Durant and whoever, Dante DiVincenzo was matched up on James Harden a couple times, and they just made him look silly. But Chris Middleton was able to have a little bit of an impact defensively. He played a role in forcing that turnover that gave the Bucks the shot that ultimately didn't go in. So there's part of me that looks at this and says, if the Bucks are right there hanging in this game, now they had to rally a couple times. The Nets were on the verge of really taking control. But if they can play right down to the final possession with the Nets looking this good, and yeah, they had a good game from Giannis, their good game from Jrue Holiday, their stars played well, Brook Lopez was good. So it's not like this was an absolute worst case scenario or anything. But if they can do that without exerting the amount of attention to detail defensively and making sure that every possession, it's Chris Middleton on James Harden. It's not Dante DiVincenzo. And Giannis is guarding Kevin Durant every possession, like you do in the playoffs. I come away feeling better about their chances of winning this thing in the postseason. And especially, again, because I feel like this might be the best version of the Nets, to where if the Nets don't get noticeably better when Kyrie is in this team,
mm-hmm.
I feel, and not that it's a guarantee, but I feel good about the Bucks' chances in a potential playoff series. That was the other thing that I was sort of taking away from this game.
Yeah, I mean, the question now is, can the Nets win a 106-104 playoff game, right? Where, I mean, there were times where there was just no defense being played. Like, I drive 2 miles and there were 6, at 80 miles an hour, and there were 6 field goals in that minute and a half, right? Like there just at times wasn't great defense. First of all, I need to jot down the slander of Dante DiVincenzo, because that's the first time you've ever said anything bad about Dante DiVincenzo.
I'm just saying he's not an elite NBA defender. That's all.
And I'm saying that he had flaws at Villanova too, and you never voiced the flaws that he had at Villanova, so I'm writing it down. But no, there certainly, and that's why I sort of preface everything I say about a regular season NBA game that whatever happened on the floor in this game, I really couldn't care less when it comes to how I feel about a series between these two teams. Now,
Yep.
a series between these two teams in their current form without Kyrie, I'll put it this way. I'm convinced that this kind of series would be close. I mean,
yeah.
like even if the final series count is 4-1 in favor of the Bucks, that all 5 games are, within 8 points or something, or within 6 points, right? I think I genuinely don't know how I feel about Kyrie coming back to this team, because there's on one side of the equation, it's you get to bring Jeff Green off the bench now, and now you have and now you look at that starting lineup and it's just a little laugh out loud funny. But everything we've said good about the Nets in the last 15 minutes, I think at least to a certain extent it goes away with Kyrie. The ball movement goes away a little bit without Kyrie, because he is a ball stopper. He is. And that's right. That's fine, because also the best version of Kyrie is with the ball in his hands, and when he is a ball stopper, so it's sort of a catch-22. Do you want ball movement, or do you want the best Kyrie Irving? And there's all those puzzle pieces that don't quite fit together. But at the same time, it's another all-star on the floor. I really would just, can we just play this game again on Friday with Kyrie Irving in the starting lineup? Like that's really what I want here. That if I'm being picky, and I'm being and I'm going to tell you what I would really want, that's what I want. I don't want to see Kyrie come back and the Nets just walk all over Cleveland for 2 nights. I mean, we're not going to get. I mean, the next time they play a team that I'm genuinely curious what it'll look like, it'll be LA on February 2nd. They play Philly on February 6th. They don't play. I mean, the Bucks aren't on their schedule again.
Yeah,
through March 3rd, so it won't be until the second half of the season when more games are put on the schedule that we get to see this game again. Now they'll play the Clippers multiple times. They play the Lakers once. They play Philly, so we'll get to see them again. But it's going to be a while before we get to see them play. Another 2 weeks, because it's Cleveland, Miami, Atlanta, Oklahoma City, Washington. That's their next 7 games or so. But I'm officially intrigued. I'll add that as one of my last things, that I'm officially intrigued, because I guess to a certain extent I had written off how much this could work, and so I'm my intrigue is locked in. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, now I'm roped in, and now I want more. But now we gotta wait. I can't watch them the next it's gonna be weeks before they play a really meaningful, revealing game, and they're not gonna play them again until the Bucks again until March. Now I'm disappointed. I'm roped in. I want more. I want more now. I want to see them play again 2 days from now. Let's do it.
Why do we have to have back-to-backs with Cleveland and Miami? Why can't we have a back-to-back with Milwaukee? What's up? Because then that would really be fascinating. If 2 nights later we got the Nets with Kyrie and they lose by 27 because because it's the NBA regular season, and Giannis has another good game. Middleton can't miss from the 3-point line, and Jeff Green and DeAndre Jordan fall back into mediocrity where they actually belong. If
it makes you feel better, the Celtics and 76ers have a back-to-back thingy this week. So
okay, that does make me feel better.
It's not only good versus bad teams.
That's good.
It's not Nets Bucks, but
sure. Anything else, gentlemen? Oh, the Warriors. What do you want to say?
Oh, yeah. I do have one thing I want to point out here that I think is kind of interesting. So, first of all, Kelly Oubre had a good game. Congratulations to Kelly Oubre. And this goes back to what Josh and I have talked about on our podcast before, but this is a team that's going to make the playoffs if Draymond Green does his stat stuffing thing and Kelly Oubre is scoring and Andrew Wiggins is scoring. If Steph's getting the help he needs, and they're going to be right where they are now, which is in the middle of the Western Conference in the playoff picture, with the capability of winning any game on any given night, because clearly they are just on a mission. Steph is a man possessed, and he's not putting up ridiculous numbers every night like the 62 points he dropped. But he is not taking this season off. He is not counting this season as lost. They are very much of the Draymond Green mentality that we expect to win a championship. That'll get you somewhere in the regular season. But the other part of this I find interesting. So you can point to they've beaten both LA teams. Mm-hmm. They also had to stage comebacks against both LA teams and got thoroughly outplayed in the first half. Mm-hmm. I just find it hard to believe that if that's a playoff game, particularly the Lakers, but the Clippers to a certain extent as well, let them back in the game. Now, credit to Steph, who delivers in the second half and made that step back over Anthony Davis to seal this game. But, again, it's the regular season. I just can't put much stock in Lakers games in the regular season because the Warriors just care more than the Lakers. Mm-hmm. So right. that is the one thing I wanted to point out that I was realizing after they came back and won, because I saw the score at halftime and went, yeah, that sounds about right. Mm-hmm. And then they came back and won. I went, oh, right, they did that to the Clippers too. Mm-hmm. I had the same thought. Oh, they can't win this game. And then they pulled it off. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's taking these kind of comebacks concerns me because I just don't think that's a viable way to mount a deep playoff run when you're facing these kind of teams. Maybe you get a more favorable matchup in the first round, but if you're the 6th seed or something, you're going to get whoever it might be, Suns, Mavericks, Nuggets, if they pull it together. Those teams aren't going to let you just come back from 15-point halftime deficits, and certainly the LA teams are.
Well, that's been what we've seen from the Warriors pretty much all year. They lose to the bad teams except for when they have a really good second half and they come back. But right, apart from those wins against LA and now the other LA team, I mean, they lost to Denver, they lost to the Pacers, they lost to LA, but they've got wins over Chicago, Detroit, Portland, Sacramento, Toronto, who hasn't been good. And then most of the time they lose to the good teams. Right. It's not like we're watching the Warriors play good teams, even when they beat them and think, okay, that game the Warriors controlled for the entire game. We're just not seeing that, which to your point is I'd rather them control a game for most of it and then maybe stumble down the stretch and lose a close one than have to mount a comeback in the second half where they outscore the opposing team by, let's see, 5 plus 3 by outscoring by 18 to win by 2. I'd rather not have that be the case. Anything else?
That was all I had.
Sweet. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day here at One Ten Daily. We'll be back on Friday. It's championship weekend in the NFL. We'll break down the AFC Championship, NFC Championship. We got maybe the 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. 4 of the 5, 4 of the 6.
Russell Wilson would like a word.
Okay.
So
what we saw in the last 2.5 months from Russell Wilson does not scream one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. The point being that it makes sense that at the end of the day, the team with the best quarterbacks are the teams that are still standing.
And I forgot to mention this. We were talking yesterday, but I found this really fascinating that narrative is always there, and obviously it's there for a reason, right? That the teams with the better quarterbacks usually win. You look at Tom Brady's Super Bowl rings as an example, and what the Chiefs have done with Patrick Mahomes.
Sure.
But if you look back over the past 5 Super Bowls, teams that have gotten there: Jimmy Garoppolo's 49ers, Jared Goff's Rams, Nick Foles' Eagles, Peyton Manning's Broncos, and Matt Ryan. Now, Matt Ryan had a great year, and Matt Ryan's a very good quarterback, but nobody is thinking Matt Ryan elite quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. Those teams have made the Super Bowl the past 5 years. This year, we're not going to have that. And I really think part of that is, and we can get more into this on Friday, but part of that is not having your typical offseason, your typical time to put in your scheme and get everybody familiar, because these rosters that are built to sort of be balanced and to not rely on the quarterback, they're all gone now. It's the guys that have been there before, that have rings, have proven themselves, or it's the Josh Allens who are just more physically gifted and playing better than everybody else. I found that very interesting, that it's a narrative, and of course, typically the teams with better quarterbacks win, but it's more true this year, where in the past handful of years, there's been a path to the Super Bowl that involves a really well-rounded roster. And right, we're looking at Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen.
Who all play on relatively well-rounded football teams.
And
but
that's right. Also, they do have help. It's not like they're carrying their teams, but yeah.
It also just might be right, because when you look everywhere else, they're just, I think, and part of it is because of the lack of preparation, but there just weren't super well-rounded football teams that were so well-rounded that it didn't matter that their quarterback was average, right? You look at the Titans, and Tannehill is still average. I will not leave my, maybe slightly above average, but when your defense isn't that good, and then you're just not nearly the contender that people pegged them to be, at the beginning of the playoffs last year. And we can go down the list of teams that just there weren't as many completely well-rounded teams that were good enough to overtake the Tom Brady, Josh Allen's, Aaron Rodgers, and Patrick Mahomes of the world. The Chad Henneys of the world. The Henne game. What a play. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. We'll be back on Friday, like I said, to talk about the championship weekend, preview whatever else is going on, and hop into the weekend. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Take care of yourselves. Okay, take care of each other, and we will see you right back here on Friday.